Here we go. I might not respond to chat as frequently as I am reading, but I will. Whoops. I will pop up every so often if there are questions, if there are comments, etc. I'm going to try and do 15-minute sprints with 5-minute breaks so I can give my voice a bit of a rest, my eyes a little bit of a rest, because I don't have a physical copy of this book, unfortunately. I will work on that in the near future. Here we go. 1 hour, 52 minutes, and 20 seconds. Eyes Like Leaves, copyright 2009 by Charles de Lint, all rights reserved. Dust Jacket End sheet illustrations, copyright 2009 by Mike Drinkenberg, all rights reserved. Interior design, copyright 2009 by Desert Isles Design LLC, all rights reserved. The characters and events to be found in these pages are fictitious. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Grateful acknowledgments are made to Robin Williamson for the use of the quotes from 5 Denials on Merlin's Grave, Mythic Times, The Iron Stone, and The Circle is Unbroken. For further information on Robin's music and books can be found at www.pigswhiskermusic.co.uk. Please support the artist, buy his music, and go to his shows. Oh, I just realized that this doesn't have a, this copy doesn't have that. It's fine, whatever. Introduction. Eyes Like Leaves is an early novel that comes from the same time period as the 4 collections of short stories that Subterranean Press has published to date. Why was it never published? Let's go back in time. I sold my first book in 1983. I sold 3 of them in the same week, actually. Kay Reynolds at Starblaze Dawning bought The Harp of the Grey Rose, while Terry Windling, who was with Ace Books at the time, bought The Riddle of the Wren and Moonheart. Eyes Like Leaves was my 4th novel, finished sometime in 1980. I was a far more prolific writer back then, and by the time that Moonheart was published in 1984, I had finished writing Yarrow and was already researching and writing Mulengro. I was fortunate to have found an enthusiastic readership for my work, and when Terry Windling asked for another book, I offered Eyes Like Leaves, and it was accepted. But before we went to contract, Terry had a cautionary talk with me. She pointed out that at the moment I had 2 secondary world fantasies published and 1 contemporary. If I went with yet another secondary world fantasy, that was fine, but it would forever be my brand as a writer. So I had to make a decision. I was happy with Eyes Like Leaves, but I realized that I wanted to take a different direction with my career. Yarrow had cemented my love affair with contemporary fantasy, and there was no turning back, so I offered it up instead. So Yarrow was the book that followed Moonheart, and eventually Eyes Like Leaves fell between the cracks like some long-forgotten lover. Revisiting all those old stories for the various short story collections brought Eyes Like Leaves back into my mind, and I'm happy that the novel will finally see print. I've just spent the past 7 months entering it from its typewritten state into my computer. Working on the manuscript was an interesting process. In many ways, it was like flipping through old scrapbooks or a high school yearbook. I may not remember exactly who I was when I wrote Eyes Like Leaves, but there are traces of the influences that got me to write that book on every page. A predominant one is the psych folk movement that came out of England in the mid-60s and early 70s. Music groups like Dr. Strangely Strange, Trees, Bread and Dreams, C.O.B., but especially the incredible string band and Tyrannosaurus Rex, the early acoustic version of T-Rex, with undoubtedly a hefty dash of Donovan. I don't know if you'll see it the same way that I do, but I hear a soundtrack that runs from the first page through to the last. That soundtrack has my favorite bits from the artists mentioned above, but also includes traditional Celtic music, German electronic music, and pre-fusion jazz. In other words, the usual stew of influences that most people who work in record stores pick up by way of osmosis, if nothing else. For those of you who like to follow continuity threads, the setting is the same as my novel Into the Green and some of the pieces that appeared in the previous early story collections. It's just a lot earlier in the timeline. Because the novel had never been published, I was free to edit it as I wished, but I wanted to give due respect to the kid who had this vision of this story some 29 years ago, when high fantasy was at its heyday and everyone was captivated by the likes of J.R.R. Tolkien, Andre Norton, Roger Solansky, etc. So most of my changes have been grammatical. I hope I've remained true to the young man that I was, and that this book will stand nicely alongside the classic works of those times. Thanks again to all of you who made these books possible. If you hadn't kept buying them, Subterranean Press wouldn't have kept publishing them. And just for fun, let's pretend this is a DVD, because at the end of the book, when you finish the story, you'll find a bit of bonus material. If any of you are on the internet, come visit my homepage at www.charlesdillint.com. I'm also on MySpace and Facebook, so you can drop in and say hello to me there as well. Charles Dillint, Ottawa, Winter 2009. Dedication for Robin Williamson and dedicated to the memory of Mark Bolan. Eyes Like Leaves. Let us chime in the heather blue of their two-handed harpers, spiraling from red and silver strings. Tones of the faces that speak from Jurassic rock with eyes like leaves, a winding music keen and exultant through the green drum of the hills. Robin Williamson from 5 Denials on Merlin's Grave. Part 1. Gathering the Threads. These are the mythic times when sages get their say, who sing like firebirds from the ash, whose deeds are legendary. Robin Williamson from Mythic Times. First, Tarn knew him for a wizard, the tall gray beard, the calm as a tree, with the wisdom of long years patterning his sky blue eyes. They met on the streets of Taliford, a large port on the south coast of Farenland. Druid and Streetsinger, Purtong and Tarn. I have been searching for you, Purtong said. He touched the mark on Tarn's brow that was shaped like a crescent moon. I need an apprentice. I have a task that reaches beyond my lifetime. In you I will see it fulfilled. Tarn's eyes widened. A tremor of strangeness stole over him. Fear mingled with bright wonder. Me? He asked. You. But why? The reasons are unimportant. Are you willing to learn what I can teach you? It won't be an easy task. I'll try, but Tarn met the graybeard's clear-eyed gaze. Are you sure you haven't mistaken me for someone else? I am sure. When will we begin? The tree wizard smiled. We have already begun. They left Taliford that day, the journey north to where autumn touched the summer woods of Avalon. The summer woods of Avalorn. The wind teased their cloaks with curious fingers. The sky dreamed blue above them. The woods whispered wise about them. Listening, watching, Tarn began his lessons. There was always salt in the air around Codswell, a small town on Kermany's east coast, even miles inland when the wind was right. Salt and the sharp odors of fish and fish smoking, the smell of nets drying, for Codswell lived by its fishing trade. Its small boats timed their comings and goings to the tides. They spun and wove a spider's web of net across the waters of the Channel Sea by day, docking at the wharves at night like moths clustered around a flame. Tarn Gladmere stood at the window of his room in the Hart's Inn, his hands on its broad sill as he stared out across the darkened town to the wharves. Beyond the small forest of ships' masts, the restless waters of the Channel Sea shimmered with phosphorus and moonlight. It was almost midnight in the late spring of the year 526, as reckoned by the Dathnian calendar. Tarn was exhausted, but sleep eluded him tonight. Snatches of memories flitted like fireflies through the grayness of his fatigue. He listened to the sea murmur against the wooden pilings of the wharves, distant but clearly audible in the quiet that wrapped around the town. Closer, the inn creaked into itself in the darkness. It was an inn such as this in Taliford that he'd lived years ago. He'd been just one more street urchin, eking out a meager living from singing in the streets, sweeping the inn's main rooms for his board, pickpocketing at times. But that had been before he met Pirtung. "I can't do it," Tarn said. "You can." Pirtung's voice was firm. His form shimmered in the firelight, gray hair and cloak feathering, shifting, changing. The raven cawed once, a harsh, impatient sound. Then the druid faced Tarn once more, his lips curved in a slight smile, eyes aglint in the fire's glow. Tarn sighed and gathered his thoughts, focusing them as he had been taught. Forms are fluid when named, he remembered, so he named it Raven. He drew strength from the hidden places inside, from the druid lessons, from his own deep dreaming. He sought his taw, the inner silence where the power lay hidden. He saw his fingers shimmer, feather. His head ached as he reached for the shape. Almost he felt the change, so close. Then it was gone, lost. "I'll never learn," he muttered. "You will," Pirtung said softly. "You must." It was a sense of discordance out there in the night that kept Tarn at the window. It was not so much the Saruman, though their Viking raids were worse than ever this spring. There was something else abroad in the night, something old and dark, an evil that he couldn't name, and nameless it was a greater threat. He didn't dare wake a seeking magic to find it for fear that the spell would draw whatever it was to him, as surely as he was already drawn to it. He wasn't about to repeat the wizard Jal Oser's mistake, seeking a hill mage, but waking instead the dragon shaper that destroyed him. He ran his fingers through his dark corkscrew hair and frowned. Tarn looked up. High amidst the interweave of the oaks branches, he saw a snug house with a leaf roof, trailing vines that grew from the flower boxes under the windows. He smiled, thinking, where else would a tree wizard live? "How do we get up there?" he asked. He looked for a ladder or a rope. The closest branch was 20 feet from the ground. "I will have no difficulty," Pirtung said, "but you will have to learn to feather yourself. It's that or sleep on the ground." His shape changed. A raven lifted slow black wings, rose to disappear into the house. Tarn sighed and sat down, back against the oak's broad trunk. When the evening deepened into midnight, he stood and called a question up to the silent house. "How long do you plan to leave me down here?" There was no answer, except for the wind moving through the leaves high above. Tarn kicked the tree. Cursing the sudden pain in his toe, he sat down again, damning all wizards and incomprehensible methods of teaching. The tea in the small clay cup on his nightstand was cold when Tarn finally turned to taste it. He returned to the window, sipping, and studied the night. His eyes were round and wide, a strange mingling of gold, gray, and mauve. They pierced the darkness with the intensity of a wolf stalking its prey. His gaze roved the streets, searching for something more than the inky spill of long shadows. The buildings were black bulks, with light spilling here and there from the unshuttered window. Then, at the end of a cobbled street, he saw movement, furtive and sly. I'm trying, Tarn protested. I really am, but everything you teach me just slips away when I finally think I understand it. If you want to learn the old magics, Pertung said, you must first put away your need to view it as a constant. Stop scribbling every little truth I give you into your notebook. How long is truth true for? The old knowledge is like a bird in winding flight, always in motion, ever changing. Tarn nodded. He heard in the Druid's words an echo of something he'd always sensed and had a sudden need to write the words down so that he would remember them. Writing was one thing that had set him apart from the other street urchins, and he cherished that difference. But writing it down only perpetuated his present problem. He sighed and pushed the need from him, out of his mind, but not forgotten. There must be more to it than that, he said. I know there must be more. More? Pertung chuckled. Oh, Tarn, oh lad, there are worlds within worlds more. Tarn looked away. As he lifted his gaze to the night skies, the darkness fell back before his eyes, growing ever deeper. The longer he looked, the smaller he felt. The stars loomed huge and brilliant while he diminished. The dark between them was an empty void without end. He shook his head in fearful wonder. He'd been with the tree wizard for 3 weeks. Had he learned anything? How do I find it? He said in a small voice. Within yourself. The answers lie within myself, I know. But knowing that doesn't help. I've searched and searched till my head aches, but all I find are more riddles. The Druid was silent. Then he smiled and laid his thin hand on Tarn's brow, covering the moon mark. There is power in names, he said. That is the third lesson of the oak. So I will name you Gladmere. Riddle well. With the strength of that naming, you can't fail. But don't try so hard. Learn to be quiet inside. Still your inner conversations, you restless feelings. In your taw, in the heart of that stillness, you will find the answers to your questions. Tarn nodded. He tasted his new name, thought over what he'd been told. What of the first men? He asked, changing tack. Those ancient people who set their mark across the hills. What can you tell me about them? Pertung smiled, knowing where this new line of questioning was leading. Know this. Those who lived here in the first days knew truth and never hoarded it. But what about their stoneworks, the long stones and towers, henges and roadways? They pattern the land, hinting at wisdom, and they're more lasting than any words my pen might put to paper, but they hide their secrets. Pertung sat quietly, considering. They are patterns, he said after a moment. Storehouses of power, some might say. And now I can see a use for your scribblings as well. Like the stoneworks, your letters can set echoes of those patterns reverberating in the minds of those who might read them. He regarded Tarn with a new interest, his deep blue gaze piercing through the youth's heart as though reading all he'd ever written, perhaps all he ever would write. And you have used your gifts wisely, he added. I can see now, for all that you scarcely understood what you were writing down half the time. A wise man follows his deepest instincts. That is the first lesson of the birch. Can you teach me to read the patterns in the stones? Pertung smiled. You have the time to walk the length and breadth of these aisles to read them? And then, when we are done, to start all over again, for they will have changed their tale before we reached the end. He shook his head. Listen to the voices of the stones if you must read them. Your taw can hear them speak, though you think you can't. He paused and then added, These days they speak of things waking. The old ways are returning? That was one thing Tarn never tired of hearing the Drud tell, the tales of the old days before the coming of the Drethian, when the Isles were ruled by wizards, and the Tus and the Erklin dwelled in the uneasy balance. Something returns, Bertung said. Is it the Summer Lord? Tarn tried, remembering a certain tale. Something flickered in Bertung's eyes, and for a moment his shoulders seemed to bow under some great weight. Summer Lord's kin, he said. His voice was like the wind hovering on the edge of a storm. Tarn set the half-empty teacup down on the windowsill and leaned forward. The moon mark on his brow pulsed as he gathered his taw. That inner silence cloaked the jumble of his thoughts, clearing his mind. His range of sight deepened, his breathing slowed. He saw 2 figures on the cobblestone streets, the first oblivious to the presence of the second. The first was mortal, the other the stalker. A Diorn, he murmured, his blood chilled. High on the downs above Avalarn, with his taw wrapped about him like a mantle, silence inside him like the soundless tread of the night, Tarn stood. His arms were outspread, his face serene, eyes closed. He looked inward. From that silence he found the name he sought and took it. He shaped it with the power of his taw into a sound like wings, the color of his own dark hair, and embraced the sky. As he spoke the name, his body shimmered, feathered. He rose into the air, sailed on the wind with a wild joy pounding in his heart. 12 yards he winged, then faltered, tumbled down. The wide spread of a juniper broke his fall. He stood in the middle of it, bruised but triumphant, his face flushed with pride, then ran the remaining distance to Bertung's tree. I did it, he cried, finding the Druid gathering herbs in his garden. Not even the dull throb of a headache could diminish Tarn's joy. I did it! Bertung looked up. That slow smile of his spread across his face, crinkling his mustache. I knew you would, he said. Tarn stilled the sudden leap of his pulse. He altered his normal vision into deep sight to pierce the night's shadow and fix his gaze on the Diorn. Time elongated into slow movements. He took in the misshapen body, powerfully muscled, the white hair that hung in greasy strands from its saurian-shaped skull. Its skin was swarthy, its leather tunic and trousers dirty, but the long length of its curved blade glittered bright and polished in a shaft of moonlight. It glittered menacingly, then disappeared as the Diorn moved into deeper shadows. Tarn tracked it with his deep sight. With a rush of adrenaline, his first moment of fear shifted into excitement. He wasn't a novice, helpless in the face of his first foe. He knew how to deal with Lothan's stormkin. He moved to the sill, balanced on the balls of his feet, poised and certain. Waiting a long moment, he loosed his taw. The power it folded him, changing his flesh and shape. He was airborne, a winged form, swooping downward, the wind of his descent exhilarating as it rushed through his head feathers. But by using magic, he had warned the Diorn. Faster than he could have thought possible, the Diorn lifted his blade into a long sweep. Tarn dodged at the sword whistled by his wing, but he lost his balance in the process. His landing was ungainly, losing him precious seconds. Letting the winged shape fall from him, he rolled to his feet, shaping a scabbard blade at his back. It was a twin to the Diorn's weapon, a 2-edged sword, slightly curved with a guardless hilt. He ripped it from its scabbard, only just catching the Diorn's second blow. He felt the violence of the impact all along the length of his arm, dodged, then stepped in and to the side. Their blades engaged again in a quick flurry of movement that warned each of the other's skill before they broke apart. Tarn reached inside himself to shape his taw, but the Diorn charged, denying him the moment's respite he needed to harness his magic. Cursing, he fell back before the creature's onslaught. He could hardly defend himself, much less attack. He'd been too sure of himself, he realized, a lesson he might not live to profit by. Centering his deep sight on the Diorn's unblinking gaze, he continued to fall back, feigning a weakness in his defense. He let the Diorn almost catch him in a whirling figure-eight weave and took another step back, only to feel the stone wall of a building. The Diorn grinned. Tarn sidled left, stepping into the Diorn's next attack. They grappled for a moment, the creature's foul breath heavy on Tarn's cheek. Disengaging, he sidestepped, repeated the figure-eight weave, again feigning the weakness before rolling under the creature's long reach. He felt the sting of a cut across his upper arm as he came to his feet. Their blades clashed again, and he opened his defense a third time. He caught the glitter of an anticipation He caught the glitter of anticipation in the Diorn's eyes and twisted his blade to meet the expected attack. In and around their swords wove their figure-eight, but Tarn dropped to his knees. His blade became a blur in the shadow as he swept it in, thrust up and forward. The Diorn toppled onto him, the hilt of his blade striking Tarn on the shoulder. Tarn heard the clatter of the sword as it fell to the cobblestone behind him and bowed under the sudden dead weight of his foe. Rolling free, he pulled out his sword and stood. His breath labored in heavy rasps as he slowed his pulse with an effort. He stared down at the slain Diorn and felt a little weak as the rush of adrenaline evaporated. His eyes misted, and a throb began at the back of his head. The shape-shifting took its toll, brief though it had been, and coupled with the way he'd overused his powers these past days. He knelt beside the Diorn, cleaned his blade, and sheathed it. But he was too weak to unshape it. It hung on his back like a leaden weight. 3 days ago, the summoning had come to him in Tullifold. Expected as it had been, it still took him by surprise. He'd woken from a dream to hear the heavy footsteps of Semaran soldiers thumping on the stairs of the inn where he was staying, and known he was discovered. He'd left through the window, a feathered shape winging through dawn's early light, and headed north as the dream had bid him to. North. Leaving Tulliford on swan wings, watching the fields unfold below, finding the familiar skies above Hemmenbraw Wood, remembering the woods of Elfilarn and the times gone. How many years, hiding from the invader, awaiting the summons Purtung had said would come, but the Druid himself was gone, his own youth was gone, and the summons had finally come. Wings gave way to the sure-footed lope of a wolf's gait, the swift, graceful pace of a stag. Shapes not lightly taken, but filling the heart with a lawless joy, drawing from the hoarded powers of his taw, replenished when he could. A day as a drowsy oak, broad leaves taking strength from the sun, tangled roots nourished in the dark, rich earth, nearing Codswell. By night now, the white horn gleaming on his brow, sharp hooves cutting the sod, north and north as the miles fell away behind, calm as the moon dreaming silver on a high in its web of stars, north to Codswell, the unicorn, stepping onto the beach this morning, sleek shape falling from him, woods behind, waif thin now, and curls all tangled, hearing the wind in the trees like a tune of old when the long stones were young, and mixed in its measures the wave-washing harmony of the Channel Sea. Tarn shook his head and looked around. The Diorn's prey had long since fled, if it had even known it was being hunted. But the Diorn's body remained. If he wasn't so tired. His swift journey north, the years of hiding, had worn him down more than he'd thought, tempered him, perhaps, made the magics more ready at hand, but it had done little to curb his impatience. He wanted to be doing, not waiting, and now that this time had come for action, And now that the time for action had come, he moved too quickly, spent his energies when he should have been hoarding them as ever before. Oh, poor tongue, he thought. I still have to learn patience. Bone weary, he delved inside himself to find a shape for one more task. Finding it, he named it. His thin shoulders widened, his chest deepened. The ache in his head was a steady pounding as he stooped to lift the Diorn. Slowly he set off with his burden, leaving the town behind. There were enough rumors of Storm-Kid abroad without adding fuel to them by leaving a corpse where anyone could trip over it. Such creatures fed on the fear that such a rumor would generate. He secreted the corpse in a thorn thicket far from the town and the roads leading into it. As he pushed the last branch into place, his stomach gave a lurch. Too many shapes held too long. He pitched forward. The shape he wore fell away like a discarded cloak, and he laid as he'd fallen, a slender form dark like a stain upon the earth. You take a little tiny break so I can reapply my chapstick and drink some water. Excuse me. He woke to find the sun hot on his back. Slowly he rolled over to stare up into a brilliant blue sky. For long moments he simply lay there, letting his mind clear. When he finally sat up, he rubbed the moon mark on his brow and smiled, feeling rested for the first time in long days. The forced sleep he had done much towards making him feel whole again. Let me try that sentence one more time. The forced sleep had done much towards making him feel whole again. For a while he'd been stretched too thin, his life essence elongated as he drove himself on, but now he remembered the previous night in a rush. The Diorn he'd slain. It had been hunting. What had become of its prey? He turned his thoughts back to that moment before he'd recognized the Diorn for what it was. His deep sight had shown him a young woman, plainly featured but with bright red hair, and there had been something about her. He shook his head, recalling again his summoning dream. He was to go north, and in Codswell, just before Bilton, he would find a mage that he must lead to Pelmas Henge, to the oracle there. Bilton night was less than 3 days away now. That was the reason, as much as the Summerin pounding on his door, that he'd come north with such speed. But once he'd reached Codswell, he'd not found even the whisper memory of a mage. Again he thought of the Diorn's prey. Her? Was she the mage? The one he must lead to the oracle at Pelmas, if she couldn't even fend off a Diorn? He stood, still undecided, and returned to the town. He'd left his staff and pack in his room. Hunger rumbled in his belly. He could do with a meal. He would eat, then go ask in the market again today. And if he saw a girl with flame-red hair, well, she wouldn't be too hard to miss in a town of dark-haired Dathian. And if she was the one he sought... I remember her, the old fisherman said. He sat his half-mended net aside and took the time to relight his pipe before he went on. Hard to forget that bright hair. She came with the latest landless of Merin, Doc Yesterborn. The ship's long gone back for more. He shook his head and spat on the dock. Terrible business. They say the invader plans to strike Kerman next. What do you think? Tarn shrugged, hiding his impatience. It was still before noon, and the day was warm. Gulls winged over the wharves, their cries like the sharp haggling of chapmen. Salt was strong in the air, the reek of fish stronger. Danger and talk of war seemed out of place. It was a peaceful scene, Tarn conceded, for all the fisherman's words, but the undercurrent could not be ignored. There were too many refugees housed wherever there was room, and that was fast coming to a short supply. At one time or another, throughout the morning, he'd noticed there were 3 or 4 of the landless staring east across the waters to where their lost homes lay. The spectre of war reared its head, and Tarn thought, remembering his own mission, there was more than the Samarand to contend with. There were stormkin abroad, like last night's stalker. The girl? He began, but the fisherman cut him off. That! If the king had any guts, he'd have sent men into Fernland and Gwendoland when the snake lovers first landed. Then we'd not be overrun with the homeless crofters, nor fearing the threat of our own selves. Do you know where I can find her? Tarn asked. Eh? The girl with the red hair. Her? The fisherman shrugged. Left this morn, she did, with a pack of thinkers. Lest I think it was her I saw on my way down here after breakfast. Had the same hair, sure enough, though it hung down her back in a long braid today. See, he regarded Tarn curiously. Why are you looking for her? Are you kin? Kin? Tarn remembered kin. The darkness will grow, Tarn, the old wizard said, before ever it diminishes. But why? He was close to understanding much, but for every knowledge gained, a new chasm of ignorance opened under his feet. Pertung sighed. Who can say? The weavers weave, Mainboss. The Summer Lord's staff is broken, and with it his power. Year by year, his strength flows from him like blood from a wound. That wound is almost dry now, Tarn. The summers will grow colder until they fail altogether, and then the Ice Lord alone will rule the Green Isles. He made the sign of horns as he spoke Lothan's name. We do what we can, he continued, I and a few others who will still have our magics. But we grow thin. We bind the old evils to their prisons and seek to keep the Everwinter at bay. But this is a god's work, and none of us are gods. The time will come, all too soon, I'm afraid, when we will no longer have the strength for our tasks. The wood lords are forgotten, and their earlkin no more than a memory. We need to return wizardry to the Isles, and we need to waken the sleep magic of the Summer Lord's kin. They wander through their lives, unaware of the Summer Lord's blood that sleeps inside of them, but they hold the final fate of the Isles in trust, whether they know it or not. Woken, they will either aid Harlfall or avenge his death. What can I do? Tarn asked. Magic is like a fever, Tarn. Each spell you use echoes across the Isles, waking in turn the sleeping taws of the Summerborn, Harfall's kin. Tarn met his gaze steadily. I'm the only one, Master. I'm only one person, Master, and a small one at that. Your time might have been better spent opening a school of magic instead of teaching one street singer spells. The tree wizard shook his head. Do you think it will stop with you? Your strengths are growing. Given time, your taw will be as deep and still as your name. The magics will spread from you. Each spell you use affects more than the task at hand. That is why such care is needed when you use magic. Echoes of each spell will ripple like long waves across the land, and who knows how many they will wake. And that's all I have to do. Pertung smiled sadly. There will be another task. I have foreseen that much, but the summons to begin it will come from Arval, not from me. Tarn sat quietly, awaiting more. The Druid looked away into the unseen distance, his eyes bright and shining. What will the task be? Tarn prompted at last. You will gather the Summerlord's kin. The summons had come, but it hadn't been clear. The dream had sent him north to find only one mage. Perhaps if the Saramand hadn't come pounding up the stairs, the dream would have told him more. Kin? He said, repeating the fisherman's question. No, but I think I know her. Well, she's traveling with the Tinkers now, lad. That's all I know. Where do you think they were bound? The fisherman scratched his chin. Well, it's late spring, isn't it? Then I'd say north. He pointed with his pipe. Up into Umbria and Kilmenden for the summer fairs. He left Codswell by the north coast road, following the half-day-old trail of Tinker's wagon. The more he considered the red-haired girl, the more certain he became that she was the woman he sought, that she hadn't used her powers against the Djorn, that he hadn't even sensed power in her. Those were riddles that would remain unanswered until he caught up with her. Night came when he was miles from town, still walking. His staff made tiny holes in the dirt beside his footprints. He wrapped his cloak around himself to ward off the night's chill. Gathering the endless questions that rose in his mind, he spun them into silence. He longed to lift above the road in winged flight, or to feel the distance disappear under sharp hooves, but he contented himself with the more mundane mode of transportation that was his own 2 legs. He needed to conserve his strengths now for the tasks that lay ahead. And if there was one Djorn abroad, there might be more, or other of the Ice Lord's creatures. Any use he might make of his magics would draw them to him as surely as the moon draws the tide. There would be time enough for spells when he caught up with the girl. If she was the one he sought, she'd know more than him anyway. He could wait for her guidance. She knew enough to head north, didn't she? And north lay Pelmus Henge and its oracle. All right. Sleep well, Z. Yep, everybody in chat, make sure to hydrate. I'm going to adjust myself in my chair. My only problem is that because I'm sitting up against the wall, I don't have anywhere for my knees to go, so I end up spreading them out sometimes, unfortunately. Okay. I should really be using the time blocks between pre-rolls. That would be a better way to track my time, but then I wouldn't be taking long enough breaks. Second, the coasts of Mirion were aflame. Towns and small crofts smoldered in the ashes, leaving black scars on the coast. The stench of smoke flowed on the wind, and in it the unpleasant reek of burnt flesh hovered like a nightmare, edging into a dreamless sleep. The Saramand were raiding. On a hill overlooking the ruin of Gully's Brow, An old man stood watching the long ships pull away from its charred wharves, sailing north along the coast, but with a strong wind in their red and yellow sails. He watched them with eyes as blue as the skies in summer, tempered with the edge of flashing steel in their depths. He wore a plain woolen tunic and leather breeches, a rough cloak over top. His hair and beard were long and gray as stone, his frame thin, his features strong and not unhandsome. He felt like weeping. He watched the long ships until they were only specks on the horizon, then warily made his way down from the hills to look for survivors. Gulliesbrow had been a small village, its one short street encompassing a market square that ran down to the wharves. It was a pleasant enough place, though plain as most coastal villages were in Mirian. Traders came only twice a year, the tinkers once at Samhain. Mostly the folk eked a spare living from the sea, trading to the shepherds on the inner downs for wool and leather, harvesting tiny crops from patchy gardens no bigger than their small cots. The soil was poor on Mirian's coasts, rocky as the sullen cliffs that took up most of its shoreline. The old man made his way through the village, his boots scuffing through ash and dirt. Stone foundations supported smoldering wooden frameworks on either side of him. From time to time, he bent over a still form, shaking his head as he closed the corpse's eyes, straightened the stiffening limbs. He would go on. It was worse near the wharves. The wooden docks, once white with salt stains, grayed with sea and weathering, were now red with blood and charred. Ships' masts, the keels and hulls of fishing boats protruded from the shallow waters near the shore. Bodies were strewn everywhere. It was here that the brave folk of Gulliesbrow had made their stand. The old man's heart beat loudly, tattooing a quick anger in his ears. His hands clenched and formed strange shapes at his sides. If only he'd come an hour sooner. He bowed his head sorrowfully. The raiders would have faced more than peaceful fishermen, weaponed with little better than harpoons and gutting knives. Their Viking craft would not be the first snake ship to vanish on the Channel Sea. But he was only one man, with only so much power in him, and he could not be everywhere. In his heart, he knew the true struggle lay not with the Samarand, but with the Ice Lord of Damodar, whose schemings had made raids such as this possible. Reflexively, his fingers shaped the sign of horns. He sighed. Not man nor wizard could say that the mocker's cold plans. Not man nor wizard could stay the mocker's cold plans. For the balancing strength of the Summer Lord was needed, but Harfall was gone, and the Green Isles were at the mercy of the Lord of Winter. The heap of bodies grew alongside the wharf as he dragged them one by one from where they had fallen. His back ached, and his arms and hands were tacky and red from their lifeless blood. He could have shaped a stronger form for this task, but he was determined to finish it in his own. He owed the dead that much honor. As he worked, he muttered under his breath, cursing whatever ill luck had caused the Summer Lord's staff to be broken and forced Harfall to flee before his brother's power. Why does evil always have so much strength? Why must the meek and gentle fall under its heavy heel, ground into the dirt as though they were less than nothing? The knowledge of long years, more centuries than one, might be his, but this was a thing he never could fathom. The weavers wove an endless tapestry of strife, so that it seemed history repeated itself and merely the players changed. Dark times had come to the Isles before. The Toos had driven the Erlkin from the coasts north to their final refuge in Ardmen. The Dathanan, in their turn, had taken the Isles from the Toos, but it had never been like this. The Toos and the Dathanan had been content to take the land and hold it. There had never been a need for this kind of genocide. The old man frowned over the awful word. The mocker's hand lay heavy on these new raids of the Saramend. But to what purpose? When the Saramend had cleansed the Isles of all life except for their own, what then? Would the Ice Lord sweep down from his holdings and kill them as well? Could even these mighty gold-haired warriors stand firm against hordes of Stormkin, Diorn and ice trolls, dire wolves and others, unnameable, unimaginable? Or would he simply lock the Isles in an endless winter? The bleak possibilities embittered the old man's heart, bringing a sour taste to his throat. He fell to his task with renewed energy. Better to finish this quickly and walk the clean hills once more. Desolate they might be, but at least they were free of this horror. And though the memory of this day and too many others like it would return to him again and again, at least there would be a distance to lessen the immediacy of what he felt, now his feelings. He bent over a youth. Look at him. No more than 17. Such a waste. His tired fingers grasped the neck of the boy's shirt, seeking purchase, and he stared at the lifeless face. A sword of axe had cut across the left side of his face, cut to the bone, and there was another terrible wound along his back. But the youth's limbs were still flaccid, and his skin was warm. Gently, the old man laid him back down and knelt at his side. He could see now the almost imperceptible rise and fall of the boy's chest. Fair Lord! By all rights the boy should be dead, but if even a spark of life remained. Cradling the boy's head between his hands, he took a deep breath. He stilled the murmur of his inner conversation and enfolded his anger and bitterness in knots of silence, pushing them away. As his breathing slowed, his taw rose in him, cool and dark and quiet. He leaned forward. Reaching out with his mind, he sought the boy's fading life essence, looked for a name, and finding it, he loosed his taw. Spells murmured from between his lips to knit the broken bones, smooth and reweave the life essence, heal the flesh. There would be scars. He could not heal the ruin of the boy's eye, but at least he would live. The old man poured strength into the healing and watched the wounds close and heal. Breath rattled in the boy's chest, and he could see movement now. Shock would hold the boy unconscious. His body needed to sleep to combat the recent horror and further the healing, but the old man sat back and laid the boy's head down. He covered him with his cloak, found another to pillow his head. Understanding flickered through him as he stared down at the youth. In that moment of soul sharing that was part of the healing, he had discovered the reason for the boy's survival. There was unused power in him, asleep, it was true, but present all the same. The old man bent his head as he let his taw recede. A jabble of inner conversation ran through him. His temples ached. There was so much to do. Bindings to keep bound, lawless energies to stem. His power was spread throughout the Isles. At times he felt small efforts were all that kept him from ripping apart in the cold gray seas. If only Harfall would return. The aches in his temples grew stronger. Nausea rose to join its discomfort. Perhaps he was growing too old for all of this. If there were others trained, he could gladly give way to them. But the time it would take to train others? He shook his head. It was an old argument that constantly turned back on itself. It was pointless to bring it up again, even to himself. If only he wasn't so tired. Healing always seemed to take the greatest toll on him. It drained his life essence, as though his own body was the one that fought to live. He was weary, more weary than he had a right to be, for there was still so much to do. He returned to this unpleasant task, pausing from time to time to crouch by the youth before going to fetch a new burden. It was hours before he gathered up the last of his strength and bore the still limp boy out of the village, up into the purple heather of the hills. Behind, a new fire burned in Gully's brow, a pyre for the slain. Not until they were out range of the ill-smelling wind, the boy settled in a bed of cut leather, did the old man look back. A thin trail of smoke rose from the village, starkly outlined against the sunset. The waters of the Channel Sea burned red in the west. "Anan," he said. "O world mother, give them rest. Let their spirits know peace." He lay down beside the boy, and his weariness rushed him into healing oblivion. Third, go. That's weird. There we go. Tarn had been orphaned too young to remember his parents, but any regrets he might have nurtured over the fact that had been purged by the simple need to survive. Let me try that one more time, I'm sorry. Tarn had been orphaned too young to remember his parents, but any regrets he might have nurtured over that fact had been purged by the simple need to survive. Small for his age, he'd had to struggle all the harder against his urchin peers to scrape a living from Telefold's cold streets. He learned quickly enough the fertility of looking into the past. The past was gone. It was in the present that he had to survive. Even as a child, his features had been fine-boned. His high cheekbones and dainty brow, combined with eyes that were round, large, and dark against his pale complexion, soon brought him helpful attention. He became a favorite with the women of the brothels along King Street, and by the time he was 10, he had more mothers than most children had aunts. It was in the brothels that he received his learning, lettering and reading, coaching in the manners that were useless on the streets but necessary amongst the courtesans and their clients, and misguided attempts to convert him into a dozen different faiths. He soaked up the teachings like a sponge, for he meant to rise above the streets, to become someone of importance in the world. He'd seen enough of petty thieves, pimps, and drunkards. He wouldn't end up like them. Fuller, perhaps in time an advisor to he thought he might become a bard, a great singer like the harbor. Or knight of the King's Guard. Against impossible odds. Even so, he devoured legend, an appetite that never diminished with the passing of years. He never believed that wizards were real until he met Pertung and learned that the old legends were true. Druids and Druidwi, they were ill-treated by all the accounts Tarn had read. The old legends detailed the cruelty of the ancient tree wizards. But Tarn came to understand that they were written by men as blind to truth as they were to wisdom. The stories recounted the terrors the Druid wrote, of forests that yanked free of their roots and march upon command, of the wicker men on high hills, burning with 100 innocents trapped inside their withy bodies, of seas that drowned fishing thorps to which the Druids bore ill will, of hills that moved to the tree wizard's summons, swallowing, drifted down through the years, heaping the worst of deeds upon the brown-robed backs of the tree wizards, never once telling the whole of the tale. For in each such great magic, Proton had explained, was the shadowed hand of the Ice Lord and his stormy kin. Tarn Spencer knew the history of the Green Isles from the time the Tus first stared in astonishment at the great stoneworks of the ancients, down through the centuries, the long years, the Druid called them, using the Earlkin term for the passing of 100 years. The mocker was the root cause of each of those legends. The great magics were loosed to stop him, but used sparingly, for their use cost too dearly. They were brought into play by the wise ones of the Earlkin, sometimes by mortal wizards, sometimes by Druids, but not without a good cause. Proton told Tarn of the forest that had walked at the bidding of Everlarn, when the trolls of Bragdal stole the Earl King's son, of the moors that rose to Castlewer call, so ended the long war between the upper and lower kingdoms of Gwendolan, of the great waves that fueled the Seal King, spelled to revenge himself on the coastal town of Brigwyn, when those fisher folk sacrificed his daughter to better their sea harvests, of the 500 reveres that the antlered woodlord Keelscar burned in the cages of wicker and heather for their part in the spoiling of the 7 earldoms of Rosehorn. But that was long ago. Now the Earl King were hidden from men's eyes, and magic was faded. As of the old Druids, only one remained. From Proton Tarn learned his histories and magics, the lessons of the trees, as the Druids had called them. He learned the names of more things that dwelled in the Green Isles than he ever learned dragon speech to mind, the fiercing, the taking of shapes, learned soft spells, the healing magics, and earl songs, the spells that charm men the stillness that underlay the power of the Isles, the power that filled each leaf of still in lake and pond, that coursed through the blood of every living thing, that feathered wings, furred limbs, scaled limbs, that rode the winds on high and hummed through the earths below, that bound the Green Isles by moon road lays, connecting the long stone to cairn, shore to shore, deep, still, wild, filled with wonder and quiet beauty, but tempest strong. As Tarn learned, he saw himself in a new light. He knew himself to be but a small part of the great all, but for all he acquired, the street urchin in him was hard to humble. He dreamed still, only now he was a great wizard, a master of Druids who held the balance of the world in his palms, to whom kings and bards came for counsel. He was still small in stature, and couldn't forget the streets where he had survived by his guile and wits. He longed to be looked on with wonder and awe, much as he looked on to Proton. He worked so hard at his studies in order to prove himself to others as much as to himself. Had he finished his apprenticeship, he might have learned to deal with his pride and his need to achieve greatness. As it was, the time has come, Proton had said, when we must follow our own roads a while. Tarn, misunderstanding, felt a hot rush of Tarn, misunderstanding, felt a hot flush of pride. "Have I finished my studies?" he asked. The old wizard shook his head. "Would that you had. No, Tarn, you still have much to learn. If I could, I would help you become complete, but I have other duties to fulfill and they can wait no longer. I thought there was time, but—" His thin shoulders lifted and fell. "What should I do? Where can I go?" Tarn asked, panic fluttering in him. "Remain here or return to Telefold, but wherever you go, continue to work. Hone what you have learned. Seek to strengthen and deepen your bond with the Dristar, the deep silence that binds the isles, shore to green shore. Remember, there will still be a task for you to do. The summons will come all too soon, I fear." "Why can't I come with you?" "The weavers weave, Tarn. We will meet again." Half completed though his training might be, the years with her tongue had still tempered him into a finely honed mage. What he lacked was practice, experience. But returning to Telefold, he was no longer the same youth that had left. There was no need for him to sing in the streets for his living, but he did. There was no need for him to find lodgings on the King Street, but he did. He returned to await the summoning that Purtung had spoken of, taking up the reins of his old life as though nothing strange had ever befallen him, and he knew no more of the old magics than what he might have read in old tales. He was wise enough to keep his power to himself. In secret, he continued his studies, perfecting and honing his skills, and waited. Can I snooze it? Damn it. Oop. Oh well. Until the Saruman came into the Fairland. They ravaged the coasts first, then drove their way inland. The folk of Teleford fled before them, all except for those who lived on King Street. For invaders or not, the yellow-haired warriors still had need for entertainment, ale, and women. Those of King Street prospered if they were cautious and luck shone on them. If not, they died. Here in Teleford, Tarn wore a new persona. In the taverns and inns, he played the buffoon, the jester, and all the while he waited. He knew he trod a thin line. Unlike the tavern keepers and the courtesans, what he had to offer the invaders was far from indispensable. But they laughed at his jests and taught him their own ribald ballads. And still he waited. When the summoning came, he was more than ready. He had a year's worth of bruised pride that demanded reckoning. But the boots on the stairs had spoken more eloquently to him than even the summoning, and he fled. The summoning. Walking the coast road from Codswell, he remembered. It came as a dream. First, a keening wind, sharp as a knife, cutting the bone. Gray seas and gray hills, waves of wind-lashed waves, speaking in hidden tongues, gorse and heather bending to the wind's gray voice, a bleak sound, moon above, glittering silver, a strange music winding across miles of moor and sea, snatches of visions, henges, cold-stoned and towering, gray-stoned like the sea, old towers, overlooking the waves, ancient as unwritten history, black, bleak, taking him through forests heavy with slow wonder, across lands once ruled by the dark-skinned Tus, once the wild kingdoms of the Nories and the Krilkin. North and north, a vision of a place where frozen seas joined white island to white island, colorless, evil, like seawater clogging a drowned man's lungs, then the music drawing him back to where a cloaked figure spoke voiceless words that echoed in his mind, having never passed through his ears. I give you this skin, those that are born. Where? They are few, you're still late. At Pelham follow. Find music from a deep heart. As name, he cried. He felt himself, heard a cry from the streets below. Wizards burn the same as men if you bide their voices. Footsteps on the stairs, the vision still on him, making it hard to think, wakening, understanding his danger, fleeing. He remembered it well. Shrugging his thoughts away, he looked for the peace within, in his taw, the inner silence. Searching for it, he found only the faces of a red. Searching for it, he found only the face of a red-haired girl, clear and sharp, as though she stood before him. Her eyes widened, and she gave a sharp cry. Then the image was gone. Tarn shook his head. The roadway was quiet. He listened to the murmur of the sea. Wind ruffled his hair, greeting him like an old friend. It seemed to speak. How far ahead were the tinkers? He longed to answer the call of the wind, to cast his shape from him and ride the skyways, or race across the hills, unfettered and free. It took an effort to shake the desire. He knew he needed to conserve his strength. He would need it soon enough in the days ahead. He thought of the girl again and was troubled. She seemed too innocent, too unknowing to be the one he sought. What if he was mistaken and the correct mage came to Codswell? Let me try that sentence again. What if he was mistaken and the correct mage came to Codswell in his absence and was gone before Tarn could return? But no, the feeling he got from the girl was too strong. She was the one. Only if the Summerlord's kin were like her, what hope was there that the Ice Lord could be stayed? He shaped the sign of horns. Or was she hiding her power, aware of the Stormkin that might be seeking her? He cursed the slowness of his pace. What if she got too far ahead? Or if she were attacked while he plodded along here? He tasted his taw, sifted it for weakness. Surely he was strong enough to hold another shape until he found her. Pertung had said, I grow old, Tarn, and my power is spread too thin. If I fail in the days to come, it is you who must carry on. If you fail, what could I do then? You're so much stronger than I am. Stronger, yes, perhaps, but stretched. My power spans a web touching all of the isles. Much of it is caught up in the bindings and healings and the guardings. My taw. But you are strong too, Tarn. Your taw is as deep as your enough? Enough for what? You could see this task through. In the dark, without night sight. If he stumbled, to be the very small part he had to play. Surely there was more he could do than escort argued. At last, as though his saliva held all his troubles, he spat on the road and drew on his taw. Staff and pack joined his sword in the unshaping that was necessary if he still wanted them when he returned from swan shape, white wings cutting the chill night air. He felt uncertainty burn away inside him as he gloried in the wind rushing through his feathers. Finding an updraft, he rode it north along the coast. Weariness would come later. It didn't matter now. For now he flew as though it was what he was born to do, giving less than half a thought to what perils his magic might call to him. Were there stormkin abroad? He would deal with them. His confidence was strong. He had already slain a Diorn. He would confront other problems as they came to him, not fret over them like some haggard old priest of Dath, worrying over his flock's sin. The coastline unwound steadily beneath his flight. Okay. I think I'm going to stop there for the night. All that yapping kind of put me in a place where I'm starting to feel a little tired. Saving the page number so we don't lose track of it. And let me see if there's anyone we can raid. Oh my goodness. I don't know if it'll let me, but I'm going to try. I know it's not reading, but I want to do it. Looks like it will let me. Cool. So I'll see you all next time. I hope you enjoyed the book. We'll come back to it again soon. And in the meantime, please remember to rest, to drink, hydrate, to give yourself some joy, and give your furry friends and scaly friends and feathery friends a kiss from me. I will see you soon. Take care. Rest well. Goodbye for now. Good night, Casey.